Okay. Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to Norwich City Council's Audit Committee, Tuesday the 29th of November 2022. If we turn our attention to the agenda, item 1 is apologies. Have we received any apologies?
Actually, I think we're at a full house, aren't we?
Looks like it. That's great. Thank you. And item 2 on the agenda, public questions and petitions. Have we received any?
No,
Thank you. No, that's none for that. So item 3, any declarations of interest? Any members with declarations? I see no indications, so that's excellent. Item 4 is the minutes. The minutes were circulated in advance of this meeting. Members have had an opportunity to read them. Are there any discrepancies?
Chair, can I just point
Yes.
out that when I was doing the second set of minutes for the October one, I noticed that I had got your attendance wrong on the July minutes, so I have amended the July minutes for you to sign. And,
Excellent.
obviously, I will minute that appropriately in the second minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jackie. We very much appreciate that. So we'll move on to the...
My apologies, Chair.
No, you're quite welcome. That's quite all right. So we'll move on to the main business, and the first and significant report today is item 5, which is the Internal Audit Progress Update 22-23. So I'll hand over to Faye to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So an update comment on the audit here, and I recognise that the report is quite lengthy, so I just want to take you through the main points today, and then answer any questions that you may have. First of all, I would like to start off by saying that the previous committee I informed you that we were undertaking an external quality assessment, and this assesses the internal audit approach against the public sector internal audit standards. This was undertaken by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, and I'm very relieved and happy to be able to report that we do act in conformance with the public sector internal audit standards, which we are able to put generally conforms in our reports now, and we've received some lovely feedback from our stakeholders. So just to raise that for you, more detail about the action plan coming out, that will be provided in the new end reporting. Now on to section 2, at the last committee I highlighted that the plan that was agreed in March 2022 always needs to be able to respond to any significant risks and is therefore changeable throughout the year. And we had a very good discussion about some of the areas that we may want to add into the plan in response to significant risks that have come up since March, and had some really good suggestions. We then took those away to the corporate leadership team and had a discussion about the way that we could amend the plan to reflect those. So at section 2.2, you will see those that we have recommended are considered for next year's programme, and then at 2.3, those that we have added in.
Shall we just pause there for a second, Faye? So I suppose to turn to members, I think could be worth taking Faye's report in part. So we can see the items that are being deferred to next year and bits added. So I was just wondering if there were comments from members on that. Councillor Sands.
Yeah, just on page 18, we've got NC2308 and NC2307, and the paragraphs are both the same. Was that supposed to be that way, or was that down? And ERP, I'm guessing that means enterprise resource planning. Yep, good.
Yeah, just to add a little bit of context to your comment there, Councillor. So we have a range of financial audits that we carry out in-depth reviews on a biannual basis, and then all key financial controls are covered annually as part of the key controls review. And due to the ERP work that's ongoing at the moment, we're going to put those in for next year's programme and focus on our key controls work. So the committee will still receive assurance over financial controls, but it will be on that overarching piece of work in quarter 4 rather than these 2 in-depth pieces.
Thank you for that response. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if you could just develop slightly on that same page. What about community safety and ASB suggests that management think it's no longer representing a strategic risk?
Thank you. Yes. So we've had obviously a conversation about the assurances that are available at CLT level, and I was advised that that is available for us to take a look at. So I will again put a response to the exec director and we'll provide an update on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. And yes, and we did touch upon that in the last meeting. So I'm just looking around for members at this point where we're looking at things that have been removed and being added. I'll take Councillor Haynes's point.
Just quickly on the housing compliance foundation checks, and I guess also on contract management. So if they're both being deferred for the same reason, is that there's a review happening somewhere else, essentially. How are we going to make sure that any audit work we do in 23-24 on those fits best with making sure that they're reviewed sort of as soon as possible after that work has been completed? Because what I don't want to do is just defer them. They get to sort of this point in the financial year next year and we're like, well actually, okay, we're reviewing them now, we've realised that some mistakes were made, they weren't quite right early on, so we're fitting them in to make sure that they're being reviewed by us immediately or as quickly as possible to make sure that limited mistakes will be made.
And that's a really good point. It's a difficult balancing act in that you don't want to get in the way of the good progress that's planned and really have something to look at in terms of testing. So particularly for the procurement one, we want to test that the contract standing orders are working appropriately, so it makes sense to wait. But what I can do is give you assurance that, for example, the housing compliance validation checks, there is independent assurance available that we will receive and have a look at, and where appropriate we can feed into the design and controls and provide an advisory role. I have been approached to undertake that work, and I know that they will consult with us when having a look through the CSOs as well. So we are involved, it's just not the right time to really get a lot of work on that.
Excellent, thanks.
Lovely. Just looking around, and I think we'll let David in at this point as well. David, please.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, the omissions and additions have resulted in a net change or loss of 38 internal audit days, which is just shy of a 10% reduction on the original audit plan. Why are you not commissioning other audits for those 38 days?
Good question.
This will allow us to deliver the programme, and I'm satisfied that we're covering the key strategic risks that we need for the opinion also. And I think it's just worth noting that last year we delivered 210, and actually we're delivering 87 more days this year from the revised plan. So we're still getting enhanced assurance. But yes, there's been suggestions obviously for adding those in, and I think these assurance allow us to provide assurance over strategic risks that we're facing.
Thank you for that, Faye. I think David will have more points. I know that Councillor Driver has a direct point on this. Have you got another direct point on the days, David, or can I hand to Councillor Driver?
No, I can just speak about the days, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Because one of the issues, of course, is that for the days you said in the report, I think it's for 6 audits, you had 2 additional days. Now, my question will be that when you scope the original 6 audits at 10 days each, the audit work that you were doing was only sufficient to get assurance over that area. So by giving 2 further days to those areas, what additional assurance are the management going to get, or a audit committee going to get, through spending those 12 days? Because we aren't going to get anything, don't spend the 12 days.
Yes, thank you for that observation. So coming back to the external quality assessment, a comment was made that whilst they felt the data was sufficient, we could add additional value by doing more in-depth work covering a large number of days. And I think to a basis point before 10 days, we can probably do more. So we can look at more detailed data testing, add in some data analytics, and add a bit more value by comparing processes across the consortium, which weren't previously factored in. So please have my assurances that those additional days will be enhanced assurance.
Thank you for that. I'll let in Councillor Driver at that point.
Yeah, David asked a question I was going to ask now, but I want to take it a bit further. There's 36 days you're saved here, so they're not been put anywhere else at all. is this a saving what the council will make financially? And whose idea was it? Was it internal, external, management, cabinet to get rid of 36 days?
Good
So
question.
as internal auditors, we have the remit of pulling together an internal audit plan that provides assurance to the audit committee and senior management over the strategic.
But you did say someone suggested it
It's
in
no-
your last answer to David.
Yes, so we've discussed it as a committee, we've discussed it at CLT, and we've come up with what we believe will give us the right opinion that we need to provide assurance over governance, risk management and control at the year end. It's not about, a budget saving here, it's about giving us the assurances that we need to provide that comfort over the processes.
And Ernest Young's is happy with us, just losing these 36 days from our internal audit?
I haven't consulted with external audit.
David, would you like to answer that point?
If he can.
Yeah, I can do. I suppose from our point of view, we will consider whether or how the committee sets the plan and the procedures for changing it. From what I can hear, the discussions, it's not just internal, we'll be changing the plan, they're going through a process of due diligence with management, with the committee members in order to change it. In terms of our review, that will come when we do the governance statement and look at internal audit's opinion at that point in time, and form a view as to whether we think they've done adequate coverage during the year. Just looking at the commentary there in terms of the reasons why different projects have been pushed back, they can seem reasonable. It's the kind of things that I've seen in other kind of councils, and see some sensible additions to the plan in terms of areas that actually got increased focus at the moment. So we don't get a report directly on it. What I've seen at other councils and what I've seen here is nothing raising alarm bells in my head at all.
Thank you.
So let me pick this up at this moment, Faye, and say that on the record, the committee does not make the audit plan. The audit plan is made between CLT and the internal audit team, and we get to comment on that plan. We make our comments, but we do not set the plan. Additionally, what I would add is, would it be fair to say, Faye, because we had such a loss of days at the beginning of this cycle, this is actually forcing the reality that we are having to cut the days? Because the alternate is to say, well, you've got 38 days left. Why not look at some other areas this year that we potentially would look at next year? So let's not lose the days, or are we losing the days because we're behind and we lost the first quarter?
No, we have the ability to scale up and scale down resources. We have the budget allocated to it. This is purely, at this point in time, there's a lot going on at the council. Putting the extra 38 days into an area that people aren't prepared to be audited on may cause additional pressure. I would perhaps urge then the audit committee to look at the programme we've got, look at the strategic risk register, and if there are areas that you are concerned aren't going to be covered and we can't demonstrate that we're doing them early next year or within this year's programme, then I'd be more than happy to take those back to CLT for consideration.
I think that's a fair point. At this point, I'll let David back in. Thank you.
Just following your point about days of delivery, and I know you've not finished your introduction, so I apologise, I'm going to ask something that you might have talked about. But at the moment, according to the first appendix, and I presume it's 108 days have been delivered, I presume that appendix is the end of quarter two. There's no date on it, so I'm just making an assumption, but a date is usually in quarter three, it says you're going to deliver 49 days, which is 79% of the rest of the plan. But in quarter four, you're going to be delivering 103 days, which is 33% of the plan. And my question is that, we're now in the beginning of December, so we've got 4 months to deliver, I don't know how many days, but in fact, are you going to be able to deliver 103 days to actually have the plan completed? I don't know what I mean by completed at the 31st of March.
Thank you. The date for the updates is provided on the first page. It runs on the date of the last committee, who's the paper deadline for this committee. So that's the current position as of that date. In terms of the delivery, I don't profile the plan evenly across the quarters. We actually work with management to understand what the work is being carried out in that particular area, and give them, get them to kind of consult with us in a time that we can actually come in and reasonably look at something that's going to give us a good amount of assurance. We factor that in. But also there's some stuff that is better to be done portable, like key controls work, because then we're able to sample full year rather than piecemeal across the year. So it won't ever look like 25% throughout the quarters. We plan try and be accommodating to the service areas, because as you probably know, audits can be quite disruptive, so that's the reason behind that.
Thank you for that response. Did you want to come back on that, David, at that point? And I've got a couple of points to raise.
I understand that. I think the issue still is you're going to still deliver it further the plan in the final quarter. I think the issue is that you don't want to get this next year, whereby you're dropping 38 days out of the following year's plan because it's being an order and a number of issues. So that's the issue that from my point of view, phase out to say scalable down purely be delivered, then we'll wait and see.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, the intention is to have all of the work completed in time, for my opinion.
No, and we appreciate it, and the proof will be in the eating at the end, and we'll see that. And it makes sense to vary the amount of days according to the relevancy of that audit and when it is best to audit that particular area. The concern that David raised is a concern. I mean, if I was doing that, I'd front load the year so that I could do that. So, what I would say is, we expect that to be delivered and not to see any cuts further. Otherwise, we won't trust in that way of doing it next time.
It's very difficult, particularly when you've got a number of cuts. When you sit down at the start of the year and discuss, this is a risk, we need to come and audit this. If you say, what quarter would you like us to come in? What do you think the answer is going to be? Quarter 4. Give us a decent amount of time to get under the skin of this. And sometimes we have to turn around and say, no, I'm sorry, because of the way that we've had to profile it down, we can't bunch everything into Q4, because then that leaves us in a delivery risk. So it's not an exact science, but as I said, we do have the resources through the contract to allow us to bring in more resources if we need to get the work done. Through contract management, I'm assured on a daily basis that we're going to deliver, so I have to go with that. And if it is a situation that I do have a possible consortium, it is Q3 and Q4 is typically quite heavy for me.
I appreciate that. I've had both Councillor Driver and David indicate, but I will take Councillor Driver first as Vice Chair.
I was just wondering about that, said about how you ask management and stuff, when do you want us to come in? If they say third or fourth quarter, they can prepare everything by the time you come in. Everybody will be hunky-dory when you walk through the door on a Monday. Have you ever thought about when they say, we'll have 4, and you say, no, we're coming in on 2? Yeah, I mean, so it seemed to me that everyone's prepared for you to come through that door.
Yeah, and ultimately, internal audit isn't about catching people.
Yeah.
I never said it wasn't, but you'd understand
it. Them. However, if there is something that poses a significant strategic risk to this council, and we do not get a robust justification for why something should be done in quarter 4, then it won't be done in quarter 4. You can have my assurances on that.
Okay.
I think Leah might want to come in at this point, and then we'll take David's point.
I also might just give a bit of help if I can to give a very practical example. So one of the ones you spoke about earlier was procurement and slipping the procurement review. When we were doing the audit panel work, we were looking at bringing in a lot of changes, firstly in July and then September, October time. So the auditors would then come in quarter 4, having had a few months of the new systems in place, to then look at how they're operating, are the controls we put in place effective. Now, what's happened was we put in first tranche of changes, and as a service we weren't happy with that, so we decided to hold back on doing the second tranche of changes, which particularly will affect higher value, higher risk contracts, until we're happy that the first group of changes has been embedded. That means the internal audit service came in January and February, they'd be essentially very little for them to audit, and they wouldn't be looking at the high risk areas. So it's we requested phase, can we put back this audit potentially by 3 or 4 weeks, just so there's a bit more content and you can get more assurance over the system. That in practice meant slipping it from probably February and March audit to an April or May audit. So sometimes when we're looking at these things, it's not about looking at big shifts in them, it's just sometimes a few weeks can make a difference when we look at these types of reports. But it enables Faye to give us assurance, so that what's the higher risk important things we want that assurance over.
Before letting you in, David, that's a very good example of the council getting the best value from its internal audit work and giving us, as councillors and the audit committee, that assurance level that we want. Equally, Faye picked up on the point that if she was asking to come in and do an audit in a high-risk area and she wasn't getting good reason for that, that is an alarm bell to her, where she would then want to go in and investigate quicker. So we can see from both sides we're getting an assurance around that kind of decision making. I'll let David in at this point. David.
Yes, thank you. It will be my last point on this, but just picking up what you said previously, for the last question, the issue is about related audits. The plan to actually increase 6 audits by 2 more days, which doesn't seem to tie in with the fact that it's sometimes difficult in Q4 to arrange the works, and if you're spending 20, you're potentially tying up managers for 12 more days because of the work we have done. I don't need an answer, I'll just make a comment.
I would like to respond if I may.
Please.
The scope, the detailed testing plan for each of these audits isn't designed when we pull together this plan. It comes out of a conversation with the service area and our understanding of what controls look like and what they should be. So I'm comfortable that if we're looking at things like data analytics and a comparison across the consortium, that we won't be adding undue pressure on the teams involved.
Thank you, and I know we're only early in this report, but we've covered a lot of ground of the report. My one point at this point is that obviously we've suspended looking at procurement and say contract management, and also the housing compliance validation checks, and so at the same time there's a logic for that. My question is, the gap of auditing that work leaves a liability in the meantime. So how do you justify leaving that liability? Where is the conversation happening so that we get an assurance that that delay is not going to have detrimental knock-on impacts?
I think that comes back to the conversation with the service area, and me and Leah have sat in a coffee shop the other week actually discussing what has been in hand, what has improved, what she reasonably feels the risk profile looks like in that area at this given time, and that did give me a lot of comfort over the direction of travel. So yes, you're absolutely right, until we provide assurance on this area, we only have the last piece of work to rely on, and there is a gap, but I think you can see reasonably going in now doesn't reflect the best option.
I would totally agree that it's best to do it at the right time. And it's good to know that you're having those conversations. Later in the report, we're looking at areas where decisions are being made. I'm trying to remember all of the report now, where things are being brought to CLT, but those conversations about the risks, etc., were not being documented. If you two are having an informal conversation in a coffee shop, and there's an area we've not looked at, and then there is a big discrepancy that impacts the council, how do we then have an audited justification of that decision process going back? An informal conversation is not a place where this council can say that we've made a decision.
I think you can just, if you just park the coffee shop comment, because it's just our preferred way to chat, but I think you should see in the strategic risk register full coverage of this particular concern, and the mitigations are outlined within that, and the score adjusted accordingly. And the CLT discussion, yeah.
I'll let Councillor Sands in at this point, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm guessing there you're referring to page 30, point 3.5, which spoke about the shortcomings of the capital project management records records of meetings, and I had a question there was how will that change?
Should we hold that for a moment? Let Faye continue with the report, and then we will come to the limited assurance reports. I'm sure will be in depth. So if you can just hold that one, Mike, and we'll come back to that, and we'll go back to, we've covered what's come in and out, and if we let Faye continue now, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm aware, as you said, it starts quite lengthy, so we will probably jump around a little bit. But if we move on to the outcomes arising from our work, 2021 work is all complete, finalised, signed off now, and we've headed into this year's work with 3 audits now finalised, and they're presented to you as part of this paper pack. All Q1 and Q2 reports are now in draft and issued, and we'll be having management responses come back. So at the next committee, obviously, you will then receive those. And in addition, we're working on Q3. So we're starting to catch up, starting to get to grips with it. We are still fairly new as a team, so we're getting to know processes and getting to know people. So we're starting to see the benefits of that come through. So the results of our work, we just highlight that for 21-22, the final 2 reports are presented to you. And I think these ones, as the Chair said, we're going to kind of focus on at a higher level in that environmental services was given a limited assurance rating overall, and capital and programme management and accounting has been given a limited assurance rating. Now I'm happy to go into the high level overview points on that or move on to the more recent work. I'll take words from you, Chair, on how you'd like to do it.
I would suggest that we take them in that kind of chronological order, and that we focus more of our time on the limited assurance reports, because those are the ones that are going to be of concern to the committee. So, you know, to committee, you've had those assurance reports. They start on page 24 of your documents. I'll give councillors a couple of seconds to just look at those. I'm sure the councillors saw those limited reports that you know, sparked thoughts in your head. So you know, I'll take points and questions from the floor. Faye, yes, please.
Just while you're digesting that information,
please.
To the highlights from me, that this is a piece of work that has no comparison. It is of a unique area. We've not audited this area before. And it's incredibly encouraging to note that out of the 14 recommendations we've raised, 7 of those are already resolved at the time of reporting next to you. So that just kind of sets the scene before we head into questions.
I think that's a good point raised there, Faye. Thank you for that. I will take Councillor Haynes, followed by Councillor Driver. Thank you.
I was going to ask about the recommendations and progress against them, because it says on the environmental services one that 3 out of the 8 medium ones are complete, and you said 7 out of 14 for the other one. Is that expected progress at this point? Does that represent really good progress, or does that show that actually we need to be making some more progress? Because 3 out of 8 doesn't seem great to me.
Okay. Out of the 14 recommendations that were raised from the environmental services report, half of those are now complete. So there's some medium, I appreciate there's quite a lot of info on the page, but just to make it clear, there were 8 medium and 6 low. So out of all of those, half are now resolved. As you know, we track progress against those, and we bring any outstanding audit recommendations back to the committee to hear from officers as to why they haven't been completed. But at this stage, they're all within deadline. They're not a high priority point, which I would expect to be completed within 1 month. They are medium priority points, and yeah, through conversations with the service area, we're very satisfied with the progress made, evidence provided to suggest that those recommendations we've raised are now concluded. So there's still a bit to do, obviously, but in terms of progress, yes, I think it's heading in a positive direction of travel.
Will they come in within deadline, do you think?
I think that's probably not a question for me. It's probably more for the service area. Happy to hand over for that question to be answered.
Yeah, it would be useful to know if there's any from that list that you think won't come in within deadline.
In terms of preparing a response, if you like, from the service, we've been engaging really closely with the team in terms of preparing deadlines for the actions. So the deadlines have been set in conjunction with ourselves, and I'm 100% confident that we'll meet those deadlines. Set them ourselves, so it's up to us to deliver on that.
Councillor Driver, followed by Councillor Wright. Thank you.
Yeah, if we're just working on those 2 reports, this is a really big figure that you actually found, 14, compared what you found in the other service areas you looked at. There was 2 and 2, and there was 4 in 1. I mean, 14 seemed to be a lot for one area. And the other area, which has got 2 priority 1s and 2 priority 2s, are the 2 priority 1s, they're done.
Those recommendations aren't yet concluded.
Well, they should be done within a month, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
And there was,
I don't have an update for you today on those, but I mean, I don't think anyone here to answer that point, but certainly.
and you don't know what they are?
The recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're included within the summary of the report.
Whereabouts? What page? What number?
3.5 on page 30.
Thank you. And should we be worried that there was 14 on the environmental services? That seemed a hell of a lot in one area to find in 6 months, a year, or whatever.
It is, yes, and I think this comes down to the fact that we quite forensically went through the contract and we compared through receipt of evidence the things that were included within the contract and what we could demonstrate through evidence. Now that in every case isn't us saying it's not there, it's just that when we've requested confirmation to show that it's there, we weren't able to be provided with that. So in some cases, some of these recommendations are just that. Make sure that we can demonstrate to the council that everything we say needs to be in place in the contract is being adhered to. And I think it's just the fact that it's quite a lengthy contract, there's a lot of different things in detail, it's a very complex area, and that has resulted in quite a number being raised.
I think I'll let Graham in at this point. Graham?
Thank you. I was just going to comment just to build on Faye's point. I wouldn't get hung up particularly here over the number of recommendations that are made in relation to each area, because you're not judging apples against apples effectively, particularly when it comes to a very large service area like in environmental services. You're talking about the contract management of £6.65 million of core contracts that effectively oversees the activity of a company that we wholly own that has about 187 employees, if my memory is right, delivering the whole range of environmental services. Comparing the number in terms of recommendations coming from the audit of that service area compared to something like the buildings of risk service, which is no less important, but is a fraction of the time a couple of recommendations, is something that I don't think the number is particularly relevant. It's the content of what they say and the importance in terms of how to address them. I think we've got better thing to comment on. And the fact that the company was 14 separate recommendations about £6.5 million worth of contract and something, given the scale of frontline services that service covers, is perhaps something we should actually welcome an indication of how thorough the audit process was.
Well, not only go the order at how good it is, well, you said, did she think that was 14 was quite a lot in one area? If you compare that to, say, county, which is a bit bigger than what Norwich Council is, would you get 14 recommendations from one service area from the county?
It's really difficult to compare, with different scope, different tests, different areas, different risks. There isn't a kind of set programme for these audits that dictates what we should look at. We have to analyse that, and that's where our skills come in. We considered that the most effective way to provide assurance over this was to read every single page of that contract and tell you where we are or are not complying. What we have is a set of recommendations here that will allow the council to really robustly demonstrate that it's acting in conformance with that. And it's demonstrating governance. And I think, focusing on the fact that already half of those have been implemented, and when we're talking about contracts, it can be quite a complex area, and things to implement change can take time. So very comforted by the fact that this has moved on as much as it has.
Thank you for that point. Councillor Wright was next, wasn't he? Followed by Councillor Sands. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In the document, the definition of a high risk is that it represents a fundamental control weaknesses. As a layperson, I would think that paying invoices where there's no backup documentation about agreed rates and specification justification would seem to me to be a fundamental control weakness. Just out of interest, why is that only listed as a medium risk? Thank you.
I think you may need to see the fuller detail of the finding on that to provide a bit more context. So we have been in discussion about providing the full report. I can only provide a summary and apologise that isn't 100% clear, but I think it will be a bit more obvious if you're reading into the context of it.
Because I think you can probably understand why, actually, if you're reading the report that we're presented with today, it looks concerning.
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly why obviously the service area has engaged with us as they have done and run us through each of these points. And the gradings are very carefully considered and very carefully gone through, and it ultimately comes down to a judgment call, but hopefully you'll be a bit more comforted by the full version.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before I let in Councillor Sands, in conjunction with speaking with the Vice Chair, I have requested the full report. I received that this afternoon. I've only had a quick look. The Vice Chair would like to see a copy, and I think we're in agreement that we'd like it to be circulated to all members, particularly in light of the last question. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. We were talking a moment ago about page 33.5, and this was where my previous question came up about the shortcomings of the capital project management record of meetings, how this will change, and perhaps that has bearing on outstanding items that need clarification. I mean, for example, on page 31, how does this relate to changes in meetings for the Housing and Commissioning Board? And also where Councillor Wright raised, I presume he's talking about the purchase order no pay policy, and my question about that was, is this to mitigate against any effects of fraudulent invoicing?
I'll take the capital programme point. I think as a bit of context to this report, I think it comes at a time when actually senior management have acknowledged that they would like to make enhancements to the process. So we saw very well thought out planning, but actually, as you can see by the recommendations that we've raised here, we do have concerns over the management of the programme for that year 21-22. We want to see consistent and detailed documentation that sits behind each of these projects and good budget management. And whilst we did see really good pockets of good practice, it wasn't consistent across the board. And if you're going to deliver a programme of this size, we feel that that's an important control improvement to make. But we aren't telling management anything new here, and this isn't something that's been a shock to them. They've already put in processes and boards in place to ensure that everything is enhanced going forward. I'm struggling a bit with the PO comment. I wonder whether that might be to do with follow-up a bit later in the report.
Well, seeing as one of the next sections relates to fraud anyway, so it's always it there.
Yeah.
Leah might want to just answer that for you for a moment.
I think it does relate to the follow-up report, but in essence we have a general policy that whenever we make a payment as a council, there should be a purchase order that's been raised. There's lots of good reasons why we expect purchase orders. Part of that is when you're setting internal controls, you're trying to manage the risks, and one of those is the risk of fraud. You're making sure that there's been appropriate authorisation of that expenditure, that the expenditure is valid, it's complete, and so on. So there's a number of good reasons why you have that in place. I think the recommendation is looking at an exceptions list of things that might not need a purchase order, and they might be things like if there's been community grants because they go through a separate approval process. So there's good reasons for controls. It's down, making sure that you've quite clearly documented where you don't expect that same control to be in place and you're managing the risks of that.
Right, thank you. So at this point, I have points from David, followed by Councillor Haynes. But before I let David in, I'd like to steer the committee to remember, if we're talking about one, let's conclude one and then we move on to the other. It gets confusing that way. So the one that we were looking at initially, around NCSL, I would like to draw out a point at this point, which is number 8 on the recommendations, and it says Norwich, and that's at the top of page 26. Norwich City Council to satisfy themselves through independent verification that the presented KPIs and associated targets are accurate. This recommendation is now complete, so it's encouraging and gives us an assurance that that has actually happened. What dismays me is that the amount of time we have spent in the last few years talking about KPIs and having them accurately assessed and monitored by this council, clearly it hasn't happened again. This company wasn't even in existence when we were raising it at the Audit Committee. So I would like to have some assurance from officers as to why we're seeing the same problems again after the work that the committee and the council put in. So I assume that's directed at CLT, Graham.
I was just checking the route precisely into the recommendations referring to.
Previously at Audit, we've had contract management come and be reviewed, and what we found with external contracts was that KPIs were not being monitored, they weren't being checked, the council was not doing its due diligence. So here we are asking for this independent verification of the presented KPIs. This additional level of checks, this is obviously something the internal audit is recommending. Why is this not already happening as a matter of course? Well, how do we know that we are assessing our KPIs correctly and accurately, getting that verification? Andy, thank you.
If I could come in there. This process, at the time of the audit, the auditors were unsatisfied that there was that independent check there, and that's why this recommendation came in. Subsequently, we were able to satisfy them. A lot of the data that's used to prepare the KPIs and what we measure NCSL against is actually prepared by the council. So, for example, I can talk about the street cleanliness inspections that we do that appear in the balance scorecard. They're carried out by the council. So that verification is there. Other examples of that on the balance scorecard are around tree inspections and tree works. Again, that data is controlled by the council, and also play area inspections. And these are key ones for things like health and safety implications. So at the time of the audit, that wasn't made sufficiently clear to auditors that actually a lot of this data is owned by the council and not by NCSL. Once we revisited that and went through that with the auditors, the recommendation was then recorded as complete. So it was an initial finding, but once there was a deeper dive done into the data, it was then came to light that actually we own the data, we ensure that it's recorded and reported properly on balance scorecard.
Okay, I think that's a fair point, Andy. Faye, do you have a view on that? And is that although that data wasn't known to be held there, is that the right process that should have been undertaken?
The council is doing independent inspections as well, and has an ability to look into the data and validate it is where the risk would be, but actually it isn't a risk that we feel we need to present at this point in time. So yes, at the time of the audit, and he's quite right, it wasn't sufficient for us, but through conversations we've had, we've understood the control framework, and we can see that actually that risk is mitigated.
Okay, well that's good. That gives good assurance to the committee. I will be coming to David. I just want to highlight my other point. Point 7, to provide environmental services teams responsible for the day-to-day operation of the contract with refresher contract management training. This recommendation is now complete. So it's welcoming to see that has happened. Contract management, again, is a bugbear of this council, because we've seen that there are issues around managing the contract. The question is, why was this not action at the point of inception and of bringing in services, but why is this having to be picked up retrospectively by audit? Why have we not learnt the lessons?
Just to add, the service lead in that area is incredibly experienced with contract management. Our point was around refresher training, and I received the certificate the other day, so this has absolutely been completed. Amongst the team members, they have also had training as confirmed by lawyers. So yes, take the point, absolutely, it should be embedded as part of any programme, but I think it was a one-off on this occasion due to the significant experience of that individual.
Okay, I think that's a fair and logical answer to that. At this point, we'll take David and we'll take Councillor Haynes, and then we'll look to try to wrap up this item, although we have the other points within about 10 minutes. David, thank you.
Yes, just following up points that have already been made, I think they're really useful for all these reports and sharing form with Audit Committee, because the remainder of there's five, you refer to 5 reports in total in the appendices. You have to summarise all those, and there's 18 pages somewhere. If we just had the 5 audit reports, there'd just be something flagged up that we'd be able to tie in questions to without having to go through and summarise. But my 2 questions on this is, one is this an actual audit of the client side, i.e. the city, or the delivery side? Because the report doesn't make it clear, and some of the recommendations could apply to either.
That's a good point, David.
Thank you. First, second point I'll deal with first is client side from the risk perspective. Taking the point that it's not clear in the executive summary, so we'll make a point to ensure that's clear going forward. And the point around providing full reports, I think this idea is being circulated through a number of my other clients. I prefer to highlight the main reports to Audit Committee members because the paper packs are lengthy enough as it is, providing full audit reports for the whole programme and plan. While some members may enjoy going through them in detail, I just don't think that represents good use of everybody's time. So I wouldn't recommend it. I feel that I'm able to bring out the main points to the committee, but obviously if it is a request, then I'm more than happy to oblige.
I'll let David respond to that one.
Please, can I just come back on that? One of the questions that I don't think the report should be attached as within the agenda pack, it should be sent separately. So that's only my comment, that's the first point. But the second one is that when I've read the summary of the environmental services report, it doesn't list the control weaknesses that need to be addressed. So the recommendations have no context, as was asked earlier. When you reply to say you need to read the full report to understand it, because we don't understand what the weaknesses are, we can't make a judgment as to whether or not the recommendations that have been accepted seem to address the issue that's been addressed, that's been raised in the report, which is why I come back to the fact that following up is that if we saw the full report and able to read it outside the meeting, if this report just had a paragraph to say we've audited environmental services, got a limited opinion, we had 5 recommendations, 3 being addressed so far, then that's it. Then if we want to raise any questions, we've got the ability because we've got the full report inside. I'm making that as a comment to take away for future. But if not, we could be in the same position at the next meeting and the meeting after that, say we don't understand the issues that are being raised. The second point that I wanted to make is...
Can I just take those, because if not, I won't be able to respond.
Okay, well, just before you take that, I agree with that, and it's something that I've said in the past as well. Okay, thank you.
The first 2 21-22 reports are the old format. The latter audits are the format that we use across the consortium, and I mean, see, people are more than happy to express their wishes in terms of layout, and I'm happy to take on board comments about how user-friendly they are, but ultimately we follow a template that I don't think I would be able to support adjusting for one client when we have a number of them. I feel able to provide the committee with the high-level points and the assurances that they may need. If I can't answer the question in the meeting, I will always endeavour to take it away and provide a response.
I'll let David return on that
I'm
one.
really sorry, but can I come back on behalf of all members, because the other 3 reports are in the new format. If you read them, tell me what the recommendations are in those reports, because there's nothing there. There's nothing that says we've made. It says we made 5 recommendations, but within the report, there's nothing that says what those recommendations are or the areas. Because it's something I can understand why you've used the dashboard and the way it's been presented, but I just think as a way of giving information to members to actually challenge. It's not, the information is not available as to what they expect to be able to see or understand. The question would be, you made, I'm trying to think what the ones are buildings at risk, for example. So there are 5 actions on buildings at risk, I think, but I've no idea what they are.
I have to say that when I was going through the papers,
you could still present the dashboard
Yeah.
summary if you wish, but I can see no reason why members shouldn't be able to get the full report. In addition to you just presenting that same dashboard that you present to everybody else. But obviously,
no, thank you for that, David. No, that's good, and I do agree with that kind of discrepancy with the dashboard. I'll let Faye come back on that. And I think we should just get the full reports. I don't see the issue there. So.
I don't see an issue with you having the full reports. If you have time to read them, then you can. And that's totally for the audit committee to decide whether they want to do that or not. And I would never.
As an addition to the dashboard.
Dashboard.
Yeah. Okay. That seems to be agreed. Actually, we'll take a straw poll on that at that point. Okay. Are committee members in agreement to receive the full reports into their inboxes? Is that an agreement? Yep. I'm seeing nods. So that is an agreement of the committee that in future, when reports have been completed through CLT, outside of the agenda papers, not published, no, sent as an additional, to an amendment, to an email. Thank you.
Can I ask how much more work that gives you at our meetings when you have one like this?
No more work.
No more work. No, in fact, it just will inform better process for the committee.
But I do just want to, formally respond to the comments on the layout. This is a layout that has been well received by all of our clients. At the annual conference of Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, there is actually a trend to move towards dashboard reporting, which we're trying to kind of review and have a look over. It's not traditional approach to auditing, I accept that, but I think that the findings and the risks and the concerns are very well brought out within the key strategic findings section of the audit report. I'm personally very content with the layout, but I'm happy to take the independent members' comments back to Tia on the design of the template.
Just to summarise, because I know that time is tight, I would say that personally I think the dashboard is useful and it is good for members, but I think having the full report gives us the full armament to execute our duties.
Icing on the cake.
The icing on the cake. I'm aware that there's still bits of this report. We'll take Councillor Haynes's points, then we'll discuss if there's anything on the 3 reports issued from this year, and then let Faye summarise. Thank you.
Hopefully a quick one on the capital one. 3.5, you note that there's a first meeting of the new asset management board planned for November 2022. Just a quick question on that, did that happen? How's that going? Does that committee feel that it will be able to properly fulfil all of those obligations and be able to provide us the assurance in future that we need?
I think they're fantastic questions, but not ones that I'm able to answer, so I'll take them away to the service area.
Thank you. An email will be fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to pull up on point 3.5 on page 30, so that's of the second limited report. The first bullet point says, second bullet point says, although there is monthly monitoring of capital budgets, the project sample during the audit testing showed days with works that were not noted in the schedule of capital projects in the quarterly performance reports presented to Cabinet. Also goes on, recommended that all capital projects are closely monitored for delays in works going forward to ensure the expenditure to date is reasonable. Records are retained as to reasons with agreed actions to be taken, and that for each capital project on the schedule. I suppose I sort of turn to Councillor Kendrick at this point, and just for views, when you've kind of read those points and you're seeing that those kind of monitored delays are not actually getting reported back through to you in your role as cabinet, I'd just be interested to seek your views on that discovery, effectively.
Well, at the end of the day, obviously, we rely upon the professional advice of our internal auditors in regards to what information is budgeted. Certainly, I think historically I've always been quite happy with the information that I've been given. Obviously, it's up to members of this audit committee to decide what level of information they want. But obviously, if you are asking for a lot of extra paperwork, you've got to realise that that will mean a great deal of extra work for you, actually, and that's in reading it, because there's absolutely no point being sent large amounts of data and reports and then actually going through it diligently, because that is a complete utter waste of time and paper, I should say.
Well, thank you for your view on receiving the full internal audit report. I would not concur that that is a waste of time. I would say that
If you don't actually go through it and read it.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's fine. It's only a digital format. It's already produced. It's 2 clicks of a button. So I think that's completely irrelevant. But what I would say is that the question I was asking was about the capital management projects, and you as a cabinet member, you have oversight of that. And so there was works taking place or delays taking place that were not getting reported through to you as your role as cabinet member. I asked you for a view if you had a view on that. Not on us receiving the full internal audit reports.
So can you just clarify that?
Sure. For page 3.5, sorry, point 35 on page 30. Yeah. Take your time. On the second bullet point. Okay. During the audit testing. Sorry. Okay. Do take your time. Are there any other? I'll seek the views of Councillor Kendrick. Okay. Second bullet point on 3.5, Councillor.
There is a regular reporting of budgetary expenditure and is that what I'm talking about? Oh, this one, sorry. I had read through this before, but can't remember it well.
So it just wasn't coming through to you in reports. I just wondered if you had a view on that, and about the level, and about the decisions you're taking at cabinet and the relevant information.
Chairman, if I may, can I ask a reader?
Yes, David.
Can I ask a question back to Faith, please, on this story? I think it comes back to the fact that it's been given a limited assurance opinion, and there's been 4 actions, and how it's being written, and how I've read it, is that minutes of meetings need to be kept, information provided to the cabinet may be incomplete. Then there's recommendation 3, which then suggests it could be a consideration, which executive directors aren't signing all opening briefs at the correct time. And then the 4th one, is the need for a specific space on the opening brief that needs to be set aside for identifying risk to outcomes or mitigation. So they're the 4 actions. Those, in my view, don't seem sufficient on their own to give a limited opinion. So, again, I don't know is there anything in particular out of those 4, or certainly the first 2, I'm guessing, the I ones, minutes of meetings and incomplete information provided to Cabinet, tipped the report so it becomes, so you give the opinion that it has been given.
Faye, do you want to answer that?
I think it's a view. We've given it a limited assurance overall. We've looked at the risk environment. We've set out the risk implications of not doing those things, and I'm comfortable with debating.
Thank you. Graham.
Can I just comment from a sort of more perspective sitting on CLT? This is an area that the council actually need to work hard to improve. This is the best practice that we've got available across the council. And it's got historically we tended to have underspent many of our capital programmes consistently across different areas of the council. It hasn't necessarily been perceived as a problem previously, but clearly as we move into slightly different financial worlds, then certainly not over-committing against programmes that might have been too ambitious to deliver in full, and getting those arrangements much better in terms of capital programme management is something that I think we share as a priority and something we need to do. It's quite interesting some of the learning that we've gathered about how to monitor different forms of capital projects that we put in place around things such as the Town Steel Fund. It wasn't subject to part of this audit because it's going to be picked up effectively in the subsequent audit. Some of the learning that we've applied in relation to some of the housing programmes, particularly about the compliance stuff, how we're managing progress on those capital programmes. There's learning in there, but I would point out that across the council we've got significant diversity of capital programme work that is delivering. And so whether sort of one size fits all overseeing capital programme board is the way to provide the best level of oversight of that, because of the sheer numbers of projects that are being done, I think it's about spreading best practice and breaking it down so there's more, if you like, capital programmes are being managed in several places. That actually increases some of the level of risk, but actually, if you manage it and set up that process right, then you get through it. But dealing with the issue that David raised about whether this actually quantified as a limited assurance in terms of, you know, little more than gut feeling. Actually, we've been on something of a journey, we carry on being something of a journey with capital management. Certainly the insourcing of staff who used to be in NPS do much of this, and now in-house gives us a tool and a capability to manage things in a different way, but we're still working through what has been a really challenging time for the council. So I think there is probably more we can do in that space. I won't sit here and criticise the fact that the audit, which I think is an important part of our improvement journey to make us better, is recording this as something that there is only limited assurance of. It's something that we spend quite a lot of time on, the corporate leadership team, working out how to make the project management, the programme management of capital programmes manageable and supportive for the staff involved in delivering those programmes without being disproportionate. So when there's conversations in here about working briefs and the nature of that, we think there's probably a difference in level of detail that you need to go into. So if you're looking at, you know,
sure, no, that makes sense.
£60,000 on improving play equipment to a play area, that's ring-fenced money to that from Section 106 agreement or something. I think it's a very different process that you need to go through to oversee that programme to a several £1 million capital project that needs a full business case behind it.
That's a good point about the incoming of skills and also the proportionality to different projects. I'm aware of the time. We'll take Councillor Kendrick's response followed by Councillor Sand's point, and then we'll move on.
Thank you very much for drawing my attention to that particular paragraph. So I think it wasn't entirely clear what the question was.
Sure. Apologies.
I am. Right, and my feelings are exactly the same as I actually read it earlier on. I think it's an important role in the internal audit to spot weaknesses and to actually propose ways of actually strengthening it. I think it's very important. I think action will be taken in regards to this. Obviously, in terms of capital programmes and strategies, I have been well aware of the difficulties that we have, although some of those are not within our control as a result of COVID and various other difficulties. But yes, I very much welcome that particular paragraph, and I'm very glad that you clarified what you were referring to. It wasn't clear before. Thank you.
Thank you for the point, Councillor. Councillor Sands, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I'm happy for any answers to this to be taken away, written and circulated to members, because I think the questions are quite complex. It seems to me that 3.5 on page 30 is one of the something around which this whole report seems to hinge, because it led me down the wormhole with a number of questions. And for example, from 3.5, I ended up looking at 3.7 on page 31 about the intention to replace the Housing Commissioning Board. and I wanted to know, the implications of these changes. And that led me on to, and the commissioning of housing, and that led me on to a question which relates more to page 41, which is the annual governance statement on eutrophication. I'd like to know what are the ongoing effects or influences on this concerning eutrophication, and what mitigation measures are being brought forward on this to allow housing planning approvals to proceed, because we all know we've got tons in the pipeline, but nothing can go forward until we've determined eutrophication. As I say, I'm happy for responses to this to come later in written form and circulated to the committee.
Leah?
I think it might be worth looking out for what's coming through to Cabinet in December, and in particular there'll be a member briefing on nutrient neutrality, which I think is on the 12th of November at the moment. Although I've got a couple of members looking at me, so there is a nutrient neutrality.
Yeah. We're past the 12th of November, that was the other.
12th of December.
Cabinet has got various items that link to the housing pipeline, the NRL business plan, and there'll be some work around nutrient neutrality coming forward, so watch the space.
And so what I would add then is if after that process, Councillor, if you've got additional questions, feel free to kind of copy me into those questions. And there might be a time to kind of revisit those subjects after those trainings, because those are big areas. Graham, final point on that?
Can I just comment in relation to Councillor Sand's question, which links three things? I can see the link that you've made between 3.5 and then the role of the Housing Commission report, and how that's being changed in the future if you want to deal with that offline, great. The issue that you raised about eutrophication, which relates back to the issue of nutrients in the waterways, is a general issue. We had a discussion last time on corporate leadership around it, elevated in various things of risk registers. There's a separate process going on about that, both at the county-wide level, because it's a catchment-wide area that covers most of Norfolk effectively, as well as at the city-wide level, because of the city, we're not only wholly within the catchment area that's affected by natural means and rice, but actually we are in control of some of the solutions to reduce nutrients because of the retained housing stock. And that's leading us down the thing that Leah alluded to, that whether we have an ability to bring forward a localised solution to unblock the housing system, but I view that as very different to the wider, to the content we're here today to discuss about the audit, because any unblocking wouldn't just apply to the council's own system and housing, it would apply to the totality of the housing.
Yeah, in the district.
Everything is called directions that stem from natural intervention to prevent us releasing any planning consent as something where we cannot demonstrate it will be nutrients.
Thank you for that point, Graham. I know we've been on this item for a significant amount of time. Faye, do you want to just bring the report to a conclusion for us?
Yes, I need a bit less stuff for you. So, just to highlight on Appendix 4, you've got internal audit recommendations. And if you haven't read through them already, you've got a summary and a management comment for any that are overdue and outstanding, so it's worth just having a quick look through those. We haven't got a huge number, but you can see progress has been made, a few slippages on dates, but I think reasonable justifications being given. And obviously if you had any questions on that, I would highlight those to the service area, see if they can give you an update on those. But otherwise, yes, nothing more from me. I want to thank you very much for the attention to detail and questions, all of your suggestions, and
I'll look for any more final questions from committee members. What I would say is that a number of the outstanding points are still there, and time is ticking. So when we've got more time to look at the outstanding recommendations, if these same ones are still here, then I'm sure we'll be speaking very robustly on them in the next meeting. Right. So I see no more indications from members. So thank you for that, and thank you, Faye, for your report. It's very much appreciated. We'll bring that item to a close, and we will now move on to item 6, managing the. Sure, Councillor.
With apologies, I have to leave the meeting at this point, but I'd like to.
Really, it doesn't kick off for 45 minutes.
I still have to leave the meeting at this point.
Okay.
Thanks to the officers for their responses today, and look forward. Thank you.
And for the rest of us who are Scotland fans, we'll go on to item 6.
So you might just want to ask people to turn their microphones.
Yeah, Councillor, could you turn your mic? Councillor Street, turn your microphone. Thanks. Okay, so next one. Thanks. If we can keep the noise down, thanks. And thank you for coming along to introduce the report. As a shadow resources, I've had updates through the last year on this particular item. I'm sure Councillor Kendrick has as well. I am very satisfied the work the council have been doing are in line with the constraints and the procedures laid down by central government. But if we can introduce this report and take any quick points from councillors on it, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
You've got the dodgy one.
Yes, share the next one. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
There's something for capital investment. There we go.
Thank you. Just to give a bit of a background to this, I'm new to the council, came to the council in June, so a lot of this work went on prior to me arriving here. That's not to say that I wasn't involved in business grants, and obviously where I came from, I was late nights trying to get these grants out the door. The initial word from government was just pay these grants, get them out to business needs this money. And part of the issue with that was that councils weren't expected to do what I call pre-payment checks on bank accounts. So applications were being made, checks were being made. Not all councils took that approach, I will say, but a lot of these grants were paid out. Now at point 6, I've just given you a bit of background into some of the loan schemes and other grant schemes that weren't operated by local authorities, which is where most of the publicity is at the moment. The bounce back loan scheme is what I'm seeing come through on a daily basis now, and the action that's been taken by the Insolvency Service in terms of investigating these fraudulent claims for money. It's quite interesting that literally daily I'm seeing these. There's one today where a director was disqualified for 13 years. Some other information, 2 companies who submitted false documentation to 41 local authorities and who've not been traced. The scam amounted to £230,000. The High Court, the only option for them is to wind the companies up, but the directors have not been traced. So there's quite a lot of fraud in those schemes. The amount of money that was paid out to people applying was up to 50k on the bounce back loan, so it's quite a significant amount of money. I've yet to see anybody from Norfolk make the headlines, but that's not to say that they won't. And I'm more than happy to circulate to Audit Committee if I do see anything of interest and locally. So in terms of the grants that we delivered, the appendices will highlight the number of fraudulent cases that we've identified and how much money we've recovered, and other cases that weren't fraud. Now that could have been where somebody maybe we paid the grant to, and then subsequently discovered, for example, that they weren't entitled to, say, a small business rate relief, so they then didn't qualify for these grants. So lots of different reasons as to why we're recovering the money, and as you can see, we're being quite successful in getting that money back. What we have to do is make 3 attempts to recover the money, and if after that we're unsuccessful, then we return the cases to BAYS,
the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and then they will take on the recovery. Now, there's not a lot of publicity around the local authority delivered grants at the moment, and I suspect it's because we're still in the process of recovering the money. So I think further down the line that there will be some publicity come out about these grants. Just to give you some assurance, we completed a risk assessment. Internal Audit have reported on our progress and our processes in relation to business grants. We also had to do eco-assurance returns to BAYS for each of the grants. I think at one point I counted in, obviously it really depended on what tier you were in. There were different levels. We were up to 20 plus grants on those. So it was quite tough to keep on track of everything.
Brilliant.
So I've given some examples of the types of fraud that we found. We have until 2025 to try and collect this, so we're on track to do that. Fortunately, I have a couple of visiting officers who go around and make checks on properties. So we were able to stop people claiming save, for example, when we knew the property was empty, but people were trying to claim a grant for an empty property. So the funding allocations, we were given sufficient money for this, and some of the schemes were topped up. There were also discretionary schemes, but they were limited, so we had to be careful not to spend over and above that. And we were given new burdens funding to help cover the cost of administering the grants. The problem with that was we never knew what that was up front, so it was really hard to know how much we were going to receive from government for administering these grants. And I think that's really all I want to say. We are continuing to recover and will continue to recover. As you can see from the table, Appendix A, we've been quite successful today. We've just got another 91k to collect.
Wonderful. So thank you for reading the report. Councillor Wright, followed by Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, actually. I mean, although the figures in this report are not insignificant, I suppose they are dwarfed by the amount of money that central government was handing out through VIP fast lane PPE contracts. And the one thing I will say about the way that this council handled the payments, having spoken with people who are business owners in various councils in Norfolk, and telling me that Norwich were doing a far greater number of checks when it came to before issuing the money than perhaps some of our neighbouring councils. So I think as this committee, I certainly take comfort from this report, but also from the knowledge I have in the way that our officers have undertaken due diligence when and before awarding the money in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor. That's good assurance there. Councillor Sands.
Yeah, just to support Councillor Wright's statements there, I mean, there's the pub owner, the jewel, the chocolatier, and of course Serco's 37 billion that they were awarded, but that's out of our remit. But one of the things which I was interested in was with the new burdens funding, the way I read it, it seemed to imply that we had a shortage of staff on this. Is this that we are understaffed and have vacancies that we need to fill? And also, again, I could be misreading this, the way I read it, it seemed that City Council would become liable for the non-recovery of payments in the future. Was I reading that right, or am I mistaken in that?
No, I'll just go through those 2 points. So in terms of the funding, what we did was we had to move staff off the day job to administer these grants, and I'm sure you can imagine there was, like I say, there was 20 odd versions of grants at one point. And not forgetting things I haven't even put in here, like test and trace. That was another one that we were given to administer. So what we struggled to do was to find anybody to backfill people that we moved on to the grants. So, but to be fair to the team, they've worked amazingly, and in terms of the day job, we're not too far behind. So we managed to kind of keep on top of that as well.
I think Leah might jump in at this point as well. Oh, sorry.
There's a separate thing.
Okay, we'll just do finish. Thank you.
Sorry, what was your second question?
Would,
Are we liable? We would only be liable, for example, if we had paid a business grant after the scheme had closed. So, yeah, that would be, that we would then have to find that money. And if we didn't do the 3 checks and before 3 attempts to recover before sending it back to base.
No, that's excellent. I'm going to let Leah in. I know that Councillor Kendrick has a point to follow Leah's, and what I would say is I do remember the committee receiving reports before that with grants arriving. It was very last minute, just before Christmas, and officers were here working through Christmas Eve, getting that money out to people. So I think this committee will, you know, share in its thanks for the hard work and dedication of our officers at that time. Thank you. But Leah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in on a point because I don't like councillors who accidentally say the wrong thing if it's not quite right. I think the figures you gave around South Councillor Sands were a little bit out. That was in relation to the test and trace work that they were doing in the budget. So all the test and trace work in the billions nationally, not specifically in money that they're received. So I just didn't want us to be criticised for giving more information.
Thank you for that point of information. Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, I think this report was very encouraging. I think inevitably one must look back upon the time that this occurred, and I think there's always going to be a potential for an element of fraud when the government announced these grants. But at the end of the day, it's unfolding, but you highlighted some cases, but there's actually one case that the now being carried out the Old Bailey, you know, as a Finnish exile, she shouldn't say this carefully, is alleged that actually a Syrian terrorist group took advantage of COVID conference. But they are, in comparison with the overall level of grants given out, they are a tiny amount. And let us not forget for a moment that these grants actually save a lot of businesses here in this city and a lot of self-employed people. And I think in comparison to the levels of grant that were paid out, the level of fraud is very small, and those cases where fraud has been detected, and we have been very successful in actually removing those monies.
I fully endorse the words of Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. I'm looking at 21 and 22, those points. So we've identified 13 cases of fraud, 92 cases with the grants bin error, which seems quite an encouragingly low number if it's less than 1% of the total pay. But point 22 acknowledges that there isn't any national data on this yet, so we don't actually know where we fall. Or is there going to be some benchmarking when that data does come out and a bit of analysis done as to how well we did compared to other similar councils?
Who knows the answer? However, if it gives you any reassurance, the numbers, I would say, were pretty similar to what we were finding in my previous local authority. So I think because we moved on from just paying out the grants to doing the pre and post payment checks on the bank accounts and checking companies' house and things like that, and making sure the companies were trading, which was really important. I think you will find there is less fraud and error in the business grants that local authorities have administered than some of the earlier grants where the remit was just to pay them and recover them later.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. Just because I know obviously this situation hopefully won't come up again in exactly the same way, but there may still be some useful learning.
Absolutely, totally agree with you, but I would like us to be, when our level of fraud is low, which to me then means that we took the right approach in delivering those grants.
That's excellent. So, if David, final points.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one final point, just going back about paragraph 26. So that you can get on with the day job, have you handed over all the uncollected, identified fraud cases to base? Does that occur now?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because we're still collecting, but anything where we can't, where we've done the 3 chases and we can't collect, we are handing those back.
Okay, so you can hand them in a piecemeal fashion, it's just, okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good point when we've covered that. So I think we've got a good assurance. We really appreciate the reports, the work of officers, and I don't think there are any concerns. So we'll draw that item to a close. That's excellent. We will be taking an additional item that's not on the standard agenda, but I just think at this point, members, we've still got the final item on today's normal agenda, which was the work programme. Members have had time to look at that. Are we all in agreement for that item as it's stated? Yeah.
Chair, we're just recommending a change to move the self-assessment to March.
Yes, and that's right. We are going to move, as discussed earlier, the self-assessment to March. So we're in agreement. That's excellent. Thank you. So we take that item, and under powers delegated to the chair, I have decided to take an additional item on the agenda. It's applied to you on the supplementary agenda papers. So it's item 1, which is the annual external audit plan 21-22, and we're very grateful to have David join us and miss the first half of the football tonight for Norwich City Council. So thank you, David.
It sets me up there. A very quick introduction. So, David Riddler, I'm replacing Mark Hodgson's partner on the external audit for Norwich City Council. For members that have been here for a few years, you may recognise me because I've actually trained with the Audit Commission, and this was my first audit, so I feel like I'm coming handy. So, agenda item 1 on the supplementary agenda is our external audit plan for 21-22. It sets out the scope of our work, the opinion we do on financial statements, also the arrangements work we do around value for money, and additional piece of work we do for the National Audit Office in relation to government accounts return. I'll largely just focus on the overview section, but more than happy to delve into in more detail on any particular questions you have. So if we look at page 11, just sets out the audit risks and areas of focus. So these are the areas where we have determined a higher risk of misstatement. So we'll do over and above procedure in those areas. The first two there, you've got misstatements due to fraud. Positions or risk that you'll see in about every external audit plan, and that kind of recognises the position that management are in to override controls. So we do certain procedures by looking at controls, making inquiries, looking at journal entries. A particular area of risk we've identified in relation to that is the ability to incorrectly charge revenue spend to capital. So we do some additional work around that. Then move on to valuation of the council's investment property. As you'll be aware, it's a highly material balance on the financial statements. Additionally, significant variation gain this year. The nature of the asset is very diverse. There's lots of experts, use of experts involved in it to identify that as a significant area where we use our own experts to give us assurance on the figures. We've just been talking about COVID-related grants. That's also a risk area for us. Significant sums involved. Many of the grants are new. As we heard, there's a lot of pressure on councils to get the funding out. So we were looking at that. More from the sense of whether the conditions applied to the grant, that then dictates whether it should be recognised or not. So we'll be doing work around that to make sure that the revenue has been correctly recognised. Pensions liability, risk we've seen in prior years, this is a very big figure on the balance sheet. Again, there's a lot of estimation, judgment applied, the use of professional actuaries, and again we'll use our own professional actuaries to provide assurance in that area. We've got property, plant and equipment. Inherent risk, rather than significant risk, but again, diverse range of asset and facility housing stock as well. So again, we'll be doing procedures around that, the valuation of those assets, and use our own specialists to identify specific complex areas we need their assurance on. The next two risks are essentially significant estimates. Again, areas that requires more judgment. So the auditing standards are pushing us to do a lot more work in this area in terms of challenging the judgments being applied to management in relation to those figures. That's in relation to the non-domestic rates appeals, provision, and recovery of receivables. The last risk on page 13 is then the group accounts. Essentially, consolidating 3 sets of accounts into one, so there's a risk of error in relation to that. But also, the 2 components are audited by other audit firms other than ourselves, so there's a need to write up to them in order to scope their work and review their work.
David, just to jump in, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. Group accounts is one that I was interested in. I do read elsewhere that you will be setting out to Ashton Shaw the expectations you have from them in regards of NRL. I didn't read it about around NCSL, but I assume that you're expecting the same level of detail and procedure from them in this cycle for NCSL. Is that right?
Yeah, when we drafted the plan, we haven't got to the point of actually analysing the data. So what we'll do is firstly analyse the data that's consolidated into Norwich, but then identify the level of that, the risks associated with that, and then we associate basically a scoping to that, whether that's full scope or specific scope or reduced scope. It's the top two we'll write to component auditor, instructing them to do work. We'll meet with them and talk through those procedures, and then when the process up, they've reported back to us, we'll review their file.
Thank you for that. Please go on.
Okay, so that was the risks. Just touching on materiality on page 14, what I'll say here is that the basis for setting materiality is the same as in prior years. Probably a key point to tonight is the performance materiality. So that's the level at which we assess prior year issues. 75% is essentially the highest we can go, so we can draw some comfort in that we haven't had a level of errors of prior years that drive us to apply a lower percentage. If I just move to page 16, the timeline, there's more detail in section 7. I think it's worth just touching on this. You'll see in the introductory Cavern report that the deadline for production of accounts for the auditors are not audited is 30th of November. Clearly, we haven't started the audit of the financial statements, so we're not going to hit 30th of November. So I think it's important just to maybe update the committee in terms of where we are with this. I presume Mark has taken you through the story over the last few years. I think it's worth just updating the committee on where we are at the moment. So about 2 years ago, the government commissioned an independent review following delays in bodies being able to publish their audited accounts. That came up with about 20 plus recommendations. At this point, very few of those recommendations have been fully implemented. You can see the issue has just grown and grown and grown. The point I wanted to make really is that this isn't specific to Norwich City, so I don't want members thinking that this reflected on the city's ability to produce a set of accounts and working papers. This is a sector-wide issue. It's bigger than the city audit, it's bigger than EY. There's lots of different factors that need to be put in place before we see an improvement. So I think there's going to be an improvement journey that we'll be on for the next couple of years to get back into timely financial reporting and auditing of these statements.
David, you went straight for the jugular on that one, and I'll have to come in at that point. Obviously, it is a bugbear of the committee, and I think the committee will acknowledge that it is an industry-wide issue. The 2 points I would like to raise on you is what reinforcement are you going to do in your team to make it as robust as possible that we mitigate those risks, the extension of time, and that we can get back on track here, because we are concerned about the audit for Norwich rather than the constraints on the industry. So what are you going to do that? That's my first question. My second question is, obviously we are now passing this statutory date of November to actually do the audit, and that's disappointing in itself. And what it also does is it has repercussions on officers. Now, at some point you're going to want to come in and do your audit, and the closer that gets to kind of budget and close down of accounts, we've only got a finite amount of resource and staff and team. What kind of assurance and guarantees can you give the committee now that although you have a fixed window in order to perform your audit, what leniency are you going to give our officers who are going to be under pressure with other elements of their job, so that they are not, so we are not reaching a point where we have not completed the audit review in the time that you have stipulated. So those 2 points. What are you doing to make sure it's going to work better here? What leniency are you going to offer if my officers are under pressure with other work?
No, 2 good questions. I don't disagree with the points you're making. I clearly don't want to be sitting here saying we've got a delay to the audit. That's not why I entered external audit. In terms of the specifics for what we're going to do for the city, I think it's worth, I don't think you can ignore the sector-wide issues, because that's going to drive our ability to catch up, because that covers the financial reporting framework, which we don't set, the regulatory reviews that we don't set. So those need to happen to help us deliver. But in respect to those, we're fully at the table with them. We're, of course, every time there's a consultation out, we're putting our feelings in terms of this needs to move fast. What we do have control over is actually when we do the audit here and how we do the audit here. I can show you, I won't be putting my name into that set of accounts until I'm sure we've done a quality set of a quality audit, we've done the right required procedures and we've got the required staff and use of specialists on that audit. From a firm point of view, we're going through a huge recruitment process, and I think it's worth just reiterating that from those independent reviews, the answer was never throw audit resources at this issue. But essentially that's what we're trying to do at the moment, because nothing else has moved. So we're trying to put in resources at it to try and help where we can. So that's what we're doing in relation to the city and the more wider aspects of that. In terms of how we're working with officers here to mitigate the risk, and I know there's a new ERP system, there's budget setting, the timing of the audit is now slipping into an area where actually traditionally we wouldn't normally go in that particular area. So we will work with officers, I spoke briefly to Robert outside of that, in terms of, okay, if that's not the right time, is there a better time for us to come in? Do we need to expand it? We'll work with officers to do that.
I think I would put, just from the audit committee's perspective, that we don't want to see it slip further. I don't think officers would want to slip further. I suppose what we're looking for is potentially mitigation, a bit of an extension on that time you're here, if it's really at that crunch time of budget time. So can you give us guarantees that you're going to be able to work with officers on that?
We'll do it. We're working on 1920 audits, we're working on 2020 audits, we're working on 21-22 audits. We have no shortage of work, so if we have to flex the audit,
a little bit,
reduce.
Yeah, but we don't want to lose our place in the queue.
Later, then we'll
okay, but let's start when we start. And not, okay, good. Okay, sorry, it's an important point, but please carry on, David.
If there's any other questions on timeline before we move on?
Any other questions, Councillor Driver?
Yeah, I've got one. We ain't the only council that earn a shouldn't do. I mean, they must do hundreds of councils. And if you're saying you're doing 2021, 22, 23, and 19 and 20s, if suddenly we're ahead of time, but you need to do these older ones, would they fall out of time, or would you do them first?
That's a good question. So when these delays first started to happen, we prioritised councils that were able to produce a set of accounts and good working papers. So maybe more problematic councils that couldn't do that, we were put to the back of the queue.
Yeah, that didn't happen this year.
It gets to a point where you have to do them.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to be done. There's almost a bigger risk of delaying them too far. So we've kind of now reached the point where we can't delay them any further. We're having to go into them. You'd think maybe after 2 years grace that they might have spent that time correcting their accounts and producing quality working papers. Unfortunately, in a lot of situations we're finding that's not the case. So they're still problematic audits and they're still taking us quite a bit of time to do, which is just further impacting upon the issue we've got. And you're right, I think 2 years ago 30% of councils were signed off by the deadline. Last year was 8%. I suspect it might be lower again this year. You can just see that continuing pattern at the moment.
Okay, David, I've been here a long time as well, and certainly know you. I always mention every time we finish reports out, are we giving you enough money to do your job properly and put things out on time? I see this year you've really gone for it. I mean, you've doubled your money. I mean, so are we going to have extra staff? I mean, what are we getting for double the money? I thought last year was really disappointing what we received for further jobs. And I just want to know, you've doubled your money, and I'm not even sure it's been agreed yet, we're paying that out, but what are you going to give us extra?
I think David's laid out the issues, and we've seen the regulatory framework change, which demands that David needs to do more work. I think the points around fees, we've made those in the past, and I think it's on record how this council feels about it. We do know that PSAA will probably treble through these prices in one more cycle's time. So maybe that's a truer reflection of the value of the work. Unfortunately, Councillor Stokely's not here to tell us how much you earn each year as a global business. But I think that's a fair point. I think let's go back onto the actual scoping of the reports more. I think Councillor Driver's points are duly noted about the costs and value of it. But thank you. Please finish your report, David.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was going to flag was just the team. Obviously, change in partner, but I've got good experience historical experience of Norwich.
Mhm.
I'm working very closely with Mark, so anything that I'm not too sure about, I need to talk to him about. He's there. And then we've got other key members of the team who've again got experience of working on the Norwich City Council audit. So I'm comfortable that we've got good knowledge of the council and continuity on the team. But at that point, I was going to basically stop and I open up to further questions on areas of the report.
I think that's a great point, and to bring others in. I think at this point I would like to have on record our thanks to Mark for the work and support that he's done to this committee. I found him an invaluable person to speak to, and certainly helped expand my knowledge. So I will look across to councillors, and then I'll take points from David as well. So councillors, any points? I mean, we do cover this each year. There is obviously variance. Any points at this particular time? Councillor Driver, and then we'll take any points from David.
This report's actually quite good this year. I actually quite like it, reading wise as well. It's quite good to understand. The only thing I don't like is the fees. I'll mention that. And long as everything which is promised in here it comes out this year, I'll be very happy with this report and to agree it today. As long as we get it when we get told we're going to get our reports, this will be fine. So that's all I want to say. Just thank Shannon for the job they do.
No, that's brilliant. David, first time you're having EY at Norwich yourselves. Any points from yourselves?
Thank you. You've answered one of the questions. Thank you. But the other one on page 16, talked about value for money. Can you, and it's a bit of a buzzword, and then improve effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness. Can you start to give a bit more explanation as to how you judge as to whether or not the council is achieving value for money? That's obviously your advantage in your opinion.
Good question.
It is a good question. So I think there was a misconception about the level of assurance provided by external audit around value for money. And the National Audit Office changed the code a bit in 2020. So we defined areas which we look at, and what we're essentially looking at is the arrangements the council will put in place, rather than necessarily the outputs that they've then delivered. Just trying to think. So when we talk about financial sustainability, that's an area we'll look at high level, the main assumptions that are built into the budget. Do they look sensible in comparison to what we see elsewhere and what we know is going on in the market? If there's a big gap, how is that gap then going to be funded by plans? Do the council have plans to fund that gap, or is there a resolution basically just borrow more money? So it's those kind of things that we're kind of delving into in a little bit more detail. What we do report at the end of it, so we don't report by exception. We do report by exception, where previously we did a value for money conclusion. So if any of those arrangements we feel that actually they're not adequate, then we report them. Then we also provide a commentary which covers all of the arrangements that we've reviewed against. And what the National Audit Office do is they set high level criteria and then sub criteria, so financial sustainability being one of them, and specific criteria of which we assess the arrangements on the council.
Thank you. And can I ask a question to officers, please? A question that's been asked previously. We're obviously going to miss the statutory deadline for preparing and completing and signing off the accounts, etc. And obviously, there's a potential reputation risk to the council in that. Is it something worthwhile the officers think about addressing, even if it's just a matter of issuing some publicity to residents to say, we aren't going to do it because of, you might already have done it, I don't know, but it's just a thought.
It's a good point, thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things we'll do on our website is we have the draft accounts already on our website. Is we can put a statement on to say that the accounts are prepared, but we haven't yet received our audit statement or audit opinion, and just gives the reader or whoever goes onto the website to look at the accounts and explanations as to why they are not finalised at this point because the audit hasn't been completed. And that's it. If you look, there's a number of councils who have a similar message on their website as well.
Okay. It's just that in the past, of course, Sipper and the Local Government Chronicle have had a hit list, should we say, of people. I just wouldn't want Norwich to appear on that list. Well, I don't think anybody would do that.
That's a good concern to raise. Robert to answer, and then David wants to come in.
Yeah, and I think it's worth just pointing out that as officers we prepared the accounts, the draft accounts on time.
Yeah.
We met the public inspection deadline. We received over 100 pre-audit requests, which we've responded to. All but one is outstanding. So we are, as officers, we are ready to go with the audit. It's just there's a degree of frustration that we're not able to go in when it's planned. But obviously, we'll work with the legal right to complete the audit when they're able to come in.
And David.
Yeah, I was actually going to pick up on the fact that the council did meet publication deadlines, so yeah, the deadline issue. In terms of the notice, there's actually a statutory requirement to post a notice as to why the accounts haven't been published in the audited sense, and we've shared some wording with Robert in terms of that. The other thing, you talk about the list, which was always compiled. I think they gave up on the list a few years ago when the list suddenly became more than 10 or 12 councils. So, yeah, that as I said, 8% met the target last year. I think it'll be even less this year, so it's not a great situation.
A reflection of where we are at the moment. David, final point.
Yeah, well, just to say, residents, the vast majority of residents probably aren't bothered if they don't drive locally. There will always be some people that well, the criticism of either officers or EY, it's just a general national situation.
It is.
Trying to get ahead of that, I suppose.
Thank you, and thank you for coming, David. And I've read the report in full, and it follows a similar path that you undergo. It shows the level of work that you will undertake. It highlights the emerging risks and the works that you'll be taking, where you've downgraded things. The one point I would like 30 seconds on is the interesting bit on page 15 where it says the effects of climate-related matters on financial statements and value for money arrangements. I have read the paragraph under it. I've read it many times. I still don't really understand it. In short, what does that actually mean? What does that mean in terms of climate change and the risk and to audit? And what does that actually mean?
It's flagging an area where you're going to see us doing increasing work. There isn't a requirement for councils to produce a sustainability report like they do in the corporate section, which is then audited. I was on a simple webcast earlier today where this subject came up, and I think it will go that way. So at the moment, it's almost just flagging. It's something we're aware of. It's something we're going to look at. Coming back to value for money arrangements, if you declare a climate emergency, and then we look at your budget papers and there's no mention of anything in relation to funding or spending, then that's the kind of area we might then start to report on. So if there's nothing in the narrative report, yeah, it's one of your key strategic aims. Those are the kind of countries we're trying to land.
Excellent. So thank you for that, and it's obviously an area that's going to grow, and it's a watch this space. And so I would be very encouraged to receive any information and thoughts on that from yourself as that kind of progresses, David. Is there any other final points? I think we've covered this well enough for today. Thank you so much for coming in today, David. We will close this item now, and thanks to David, and thanks on record to Mark. And that actually does conclude today's audit committee.